hopefully don't do it very often. And then it's like when you have to do it, oh my God, it's like the most...
It's mentally exhausting.
Arduous thing. It's so mentally exhausting. So kudos to you. You're doing it so fast and like getting all of your stuff done.
Like I said, I didn't start looking until the last week of April because I know how places work. But I have to say, I'll just say it because we're on air, but like you predicted what would happen because I lost the first place that I applied to. They were like, sorry, somebody beat you to it. And that was my dream apartment. And I told you, and you were like, I have a feeling that's not the case. You like went full medium and you're like, something tells me that's not the story here. And I think we're going to find out very soon.
I'm serious. I really feel like it was your space because when you sent me photos and videos, I was like, okay, that has you written all over it. Oh, but God, also from personal experience, I swear that when something is not meant for you, like living wise, it falls through, especially in like these, like in cities like LA or like in New York or DC.
Totally.
Because when I got here, there was a place I had my heart set on.
Oh,
it had
God.
a loft, and it was like this, but this loft was like, I kid you not, 20 feet up in the air. It would have been so treacherous if I like slipped or something, or if I needed to get down in the middle of the night. Like it would have been so bad. And I still to this day think to myself that was that was some sort of like divine intervention, and I just had
somebody
this
had their
feeling,
hands in it.
Okay, yes, and I was like, okay, karma. If I lost that place, like please let Silas get this place. Like let that be the full circle of that karma. I'm dead serious. That's what I thought. And then when you texted me and you said you got it, I was like, oh my God. I'm so excited. It's going to be amazing.
It was so exciting. Well, because it was crazy, the timing of it, because I had found another place that was down the street, because really like what I first fell in love with was the neighborhood, like West Adams area. Shouldn't dox myself. But I found another place down the street and I was so committed to it. They wanted a really fast turnaround. I had the pen in my hand ready to sign that lease when I got a text from the other property manager, like leasing agent. And she goes, it's back. She goes, it opened up. That's what I imagine her voice to be. It's probably not what it's 100%. Like. And I my whole world shifted in that second, and everything had to happen like so fast. And then I felt like the cards were stacked against me because they were like, we need your deposit and we need your first month's rent like immediately in cashier's check. And I never write checks. So I had to go to the bank to get the cashier's check. I show up to my bank, which is Bank of America, and the doors are all locked. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? I was like, these are their hours. And I'm like peering inside, like trying to jam the door open because I see all the tellers standing there. And I'm like, what the hell is this? I go around the other side and I finally see cops inside. They had just been robbed. They had been robbed.
Wait, so that also is completely whatever, the universe making sure you didn't get that cashier's check.
Like, I'm banging on the window. I'm like, excuse me. Are you still operating services? Someone's like bleeding inside. And I'm like, excuse me.
You're like, if I don't get this damn apartment.
Oh, I was going to be sick to my
I'll
stomach.
be on the street.
That's stressful. Yeah, it's stressful. I mean, I had a million people who were like, stay on my couch, stay with me. And I'm like, no, this is my time. I'm going to get this place.
Well, you like to have your space, which I admire about you, and because I'm very much the same way. It is so tough to like go from living in a really nice space like you're in and having all your creature comforts, and then you got to go live on somebody's couch, do the whole running around trying to find a place. It's just
I love what you just said, creature comforts. I don't think I've ever heard anyone phrase it like that. You have your creature
comforts.
Oh, really? No, I love that.
Your creeper comforts.
My creepers. Oh, wait, what a perfect segue. Thank you for setting me up. Yeah. Creepers, welcome back to CreepTime, the podcast with Celestine and Stu. Stu is back from the wedding.
Creepers, yes, back from the wedding.
Did you catch when I told everybody you were an ordained minister, which is a flat out lie, but in my mind, it is nothing but truth.
No, but that is true. I am an ordained
No,
minister.
you're not.
I did not.
Are you really?
Yes. But it's the same thing as what Jack said. I mean, I had to do it because I was in I took a religion course like offered by some community college when I was in high school. And
oh my God.
Part of the course was that I had to get ordained. But it takes literally like you could do it tonight. You go on, you answer all these questions, and then you get your little certificate. It takes less than 10 minutes. It's crazy. But
in my mind, I'm like, that should be illegal. But like, I was like, but why would it be? Yeah, I mean, if it's that simple, just let anybody marry anybody. That's great.
I guess I honestly don't know why they make it that easy. I guess because so many people like to be married by people that are close to them that.
Yeah, like I want my best friend married us, or like my I get that. That makes sense.
Yeah. I guess they have to make it that easy.
But to clarify, you did not officiate.
Baby.
Get ordained.
I did not officiate. No,
okay.
I did not officiate. But can I just tell you, it was so fun because my friend's grandfather officiated it, and he's actually he's an actual minister, and I just forgot to grow up in the South and go to church, and that draw that they have when they are doing, the speaking,
like sermons,
whatever,
sermons,
sermons and everything. Yes, and he gets up there, and he was so sweet, and he's like, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today." And I was just immediately like, I have stepped back in time. Like I am back sitting in a church pew, 7 years old, like drawing on the little like program that they give you at the beginning, just like not paying any attention. Like, but it's
a full on sense memory. Oh my God.
Yes, full on sense memory. But it was so sweet. But yeah, he should have and did a wonderful job officiating that wedding. I definitely don't want to officiate anybody's wedding.
No, I'm gonna start putting you up for like wedding jobs now. I'm gonna start.
Oh my God,
we should officiate a creeper's wedding. We should do that. How fun! Come on.
Oh my God,
come on,
creepers! Somebody, let us know if you're getting married.
Yeah,
somebody
hit me up in the DMs.
Yes,
we should. Yeah, on our own dime. We'll get hotels and everything.
Yes, done.
I was like having this moment where I was thinking about all of the cases that we could have done today. And I realized that very selfishly, why I really want to do batch episodes with you is because I get so impatient because there are so many good cases that I want to cover with you. Like just in the last couple of weeks, I've gotten a lot of DMs and I see you guys post on, you like submit to the questions on Spotify. They are like right in step with my thinking because all of the cases they suggest, I'm like, yes, that's so good. We have like Jody Husentrut, Lucas Magnotta. There were a couple there that were new that I hadn't even read before. So I was like, oh, that's like perfect if Stu wants to take a nap. I know I told you that we were going to do the sleepwalking murder episode. And I actually told you we were going to do a paranormal episode this week, but I did a pivot. Because I have research that I found, like I said, from a couple months back for the case of Mary Day, which you haven't heard of. I had never heard of it until I heard a podcast about it. And I was like, whoa, this is a strange story. This is weird.
Her name already gives me the creeps. And I feel like I can say that because I just know a lot of Marys with like plain Jane names. And so...
Well, that name specifically it almost feels made up. Something about the name Mary
Day.
Like something I'd hear in a novel. It's like a character.
It's haunting. Yeah, it does. It's haunting. It's a haunting name.
Oh, but before we jump into it, speaking of hauntings, did you listen to the previous episode with Jack?
Yes.
Okay, what's your opinion on the Enfield poltergeist? Was it hoax, fabricated, or was there some truth there?
Okay, it was really, I was grappling with it so much when I was listening to you guys, because you can't deny that when you hear those audio recordings, the thought of that being a little girl is so, like, how in the world?
It's shocking, isn't it?
That, and then her knowing the name of the previous tenant.
To me, I'm like, listen, that's like very black and white to me, because what is the scenario where she's even fed that information? Like, who knows that?
Exactly. Unless, like you said, some adult told her, or if she heard it from somebody and then decided to do this like whole hoax thing. I mean, I did.
That is ballsy for like a child.
I know.
I mean, if it's all a hoax, she's a talented kid.
I was going to say.
She needs an agent.
Really, she needs an agent. It was a whole ruse. If she really pulled that off, I'm obsessed. Like, I'm shocked. Like, that's crazy.
I mean, just the vocal trickery alone is like impressive.
Yeah.
Like, how you can throw your voice like that.
one question. What happened to her? Like, did she grow up and have a perfectly normal life? Like, what in the world?
Yeah, I think they all went on to have very normal lives because don't forget, there were the two girls who were kind of the focal point of the hauntings.
Yes.
And then there were two other children, I believe, so 4 total. They all grew up and just had pretty like normal lives. I think the story continued to follow them. So they would continue to do like interviews. I think maybe they wrote books, like things along those lines. But they really never made like a lot of money off of it. So if it was a hoax for the interests of like financial gain, that never happened. Like there was no like long game there. It was just a story that like followed them. But I also can't imagine that if it was real, you would grow up to be a perfectly normal person.
Exactly. That's kind of the thing is that, I don't know, by the end of it, I did kind of lean more on like the hoaxy side and that it was just a weird, like she had the deck stacked perfectly kind of moment in her life where it all just kind of worked out and she was able to pull it off. But those freaking audio recordings are so weird. I could not
audio recordings
like,
for
shake them.
sure. Yeah, they're strange. I actually think the first police like witness statement is really interesting because I couldn't imagine that an officer, especially officers that were like, we don't want to get our hands tied up with this, would have any reason to like lie about something they saw. You know what I mean? Like they're used to giving witness statements. They're used to saying exactly what they saw. So for that constable to come in and say, I saw a chair move by itself 4 feet and then I went to the chair to pick it up and look for the string and there was no proof that there was any like trickery going on. I'm like, that's scary. Like that's poltergeist. That's a real poltergeist.
That is, yeah. Do you believe in like ghosts and? I mean, I guess
me.
I would.
I believe in ghosts?
I assume you do. Yeah, I assume you do because also your experience with Jack at
but I've had
Paracon.
Parapod Festival. Did you say Parapon?
I just said Paracon. Paracon.
No, you see, that is the Codfish Festival I'm going to this summer.
Yes,
you got those mixed up, baby.
Yes, I got that. I forgot about your love of fish.
Yes, my love of cod. I just love a good cod. Not only have I had experiences, or recently had experiences with that, but I've had experiences growing up with the paranormal. Like my
I don't want to derail us, but I'm so curious.
I know. Well, I think I must have told you these stories a long time ago, but there's only 2 major ones that come to mind. But I almost told this one to Jack, like on the note of a poltergeist. When I was a kid, I had a TV in my room because I was very like afraid of the dark and like I just didn't want to like sleep in my room alone without a TV on. I was young. Like I must have been like 8, maybe 7. And I remember like being in my room, laying in bed, and it's funny because my mom grew up in the same house that I grew up in. Like my parents bought it from my grandparents. So she had paranormal experiences in that house when she was a kid. My grandma used to tell me these stories. And I slept in the same room that she did where she had those experiences. So I'm in the room. I remember this so vividly. Looking to the foot of my bed, and on the left is a door to like a little closet, kind of like a halfway closet or something.
Yeah.
And it's illuminated by the TV, and I'm looking at it because it's weird because it has a hook on the outside of the door, which I always thought was strange for a closet. Like, why would you lock a closet from the outside? But I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at that hook, which is like a loose hook. Like you just lift it up. It's like a latch hook. And I was looking at it, and I just remember thinking like, oh God, that would be so scary if that thing just like flew open by itself. I kid you not. In that moment, that hook flew open with such force that I actually couldn't believe what I was seeing. Like I thought I dreamt it or something. And I remember laying in bed paralyzed, and I slowly worked up the nerve to just go, Mom!
Oh my God.
I didn't sleep in that room for weeks.
Poor little thing.
Oh, that was so... You know why? Because I used to lock scary stuffed animals in that closet. Any like stuffed animal that I got for like Christmas and stuff, like I would put them in that closet because it would scare me.
You had scary stuffed animals. That's amazing.
I had like so before like Chucky came out, there was a doll that was kind of like a Chucky, like a good guy doll, and I had one of those. My parents got it for me for Christmas, and it scared the crap out of me. The thing was awful, and I used to lock it in that damn closet.
That's so funny. Just like self-induced torture.
I know. But that, I mean, come on. That was like a pretty, I couldn't imagine like how that could have happened any other way
Yeah.
than a paranormal experience, you know?
Do you know what? I got chills when you were telling that because I believe that you have like I've always kind of thought this. I mean, I think it about myself too, but when you're kind of like, when you believe it enough or like you're tapped into it enough, it almost feels like it kind of starts as like a kid in a weird way. Like I remember having moments like that too, where I would like start to think of like, what if that did happen or what if, and it would just happen. Like, it was just weird.
And you can't really tell. You're like, am I,
thought.
Yeah, you're like, am I a medium? Am I like anticipating like things before they happen, or am I manifesting it? Like, you don't really fully understand it. But I do think it was specific to like being a kid, though, like being a child. I felt more connected to that than I do now, which is shocking because now it's all I talk about.
Yeah, now I'm like flying out of the bed. I'm like, I will tackle this to the ground, whatever it is. I got to get my 8 hours.
I'm with you, girl. But yeah, thanks for bringing that story up. I didn't get to tell that last episode, so I'm happy I finally got to share it.
Ooh, I feel
so. Yes, I do believe in ghosts. I absolutely do. I think I also believe in telekinesis, that people can move things with their minds. There's a really famous case which we should cover on here of a Russian housewife in her, I think, 50s who realized that she could do this. And when I talk about moving things with your mind, very small things. Like she could move like a box of matches if she really concentrated, and she could like very small things like that. And it was interesting to like watch her work in these experiments because obviously it's a controlled environment, like there's no strings or anything. And they would go on for hours and they would monitor her. She would sweat, become dizzy. Her heart rate would like double. Like she would really go through like a physical experience, concentrating, trying to move these things. And she could do it.
Okay, not to get like so deep here, but it's weird because I was thinking about this actually when I was listening to this episode with Jack. I was thinking to myself, like, where does it all stem from? Because at some point someone had the thought of like, what if we could move stuff with our minds? Or like, did they just have the thought, or did somebody experience it first? Like chicken or the egg kind of situation. Like I often think about that. I'm like, did somebody experience a ghost and then went and told somebody and that something weird happened, and then we just started naming that like, oh, that would be like a ghost, or
like that's a haunt.
Did that, yeah, a haunt. And then did somebody one day like sort of make something move, or they thought they did with their brain? They were just thinking about something so hard, and then we like pass that down. I don't know. That's probably like way too meta.
I think we should know. We should do some history on that. I would be very curious to hear about the history of like when hauntings, or the word haunting, became, I don't know, something that was popular throughout culture, because it must date back like a very, very long time from now. But we should cover that because we are a history podcast, are we not?
We are.
We are, baby.
Are we? Are we? I remember we were like, it was kind of a point of contention. I don't know if we were. We kind of were, and then we weren't, and then are we?
Yeah, Spotify gave me a call, and they were like, "It's not going to happen. You're not going to be a history podcast." I'll make it more colorful. They were like, "You will never be a history podcast with Spotify." But then I got an email, and they were like, "Just kidding. We can categorize." They were like,
"We've only got like 10 on the docket. We need an 11th." So
they need our Gen Z audience. They need a Gen Z audience.
Exactly.
And apparently we bring the Gen Z audience.
Oh my God. No cap.
No cap at all,
get
baby.
canceled for that.
No. You'll be fine.
We just lost like so many listeners from me saying that.
No, the Gen Z one, they're the diehards. They're there forever.
Yeah. Okay.
We love them. They love us. All right. I'm going to jump into Mary Day. Okay. So let me just give you a quick little top line just so I can refresh for myself because, again, it's been a minute since I've read this research.
Yeah.
So today we are going to get into the disappearance. It's a disappearance case of a girl named Mary Day, which is this like very sinister story of this 13-year-old girl who I think disappeared. I'm not sure. Like I'd have to check timing wise that this happened in the 70s or 80s because it kind of crosses both decades. But she went missing in Seaside, California. Now, there are a lot of disappearance cases, particularly of teenagers who go missing, but this story is really interesting to me. And the first time I heard it, all I thought about was you. You're going to gasp a lot throughout this story. There is a twist around every corner of this tale.
I'm excited.
It's why. Like, I'm just going to set you up. You can't predict, like, what's going to happen. You're going to think you can, but you can't.
Okay.
When I first heard it, I was enwrapped. Like, I was, like, just waiting, dying to hear, like, what was going to come next. So we're going to dive into the bizarre circumstances of how this girl went missing and figure out what really happened to her. Now, the story does begin in the 70s. Hold on. Got to clear my throat before I get into this because this is going to be a hefty amount of research. Our backstory starts in the 70s. I know. Take a breath. Take a sip, baby. We hone in on our two parents. We've got Charlotte Day and her husband, Charles Day, and they're living in California, and they're struggling. Like, from the get-go, let's start our story there. They're not functional parents, financially, emotionally. Like, they're very dysfunctional with this family, and they have 3 young children, 3 daughters. Of those daughters included Mary Day, there was Sherry, and there was Kathy. Now, from very early on in the childhood, these 3 girls, they were kind of troubled, as you can imagine, because of everything that was going on in the household. They had parents that weren't taking care of them. So believe it or not, even in the 1970s, protective services stepped in and the girls were removed from the home. But what that meant was that they were kind of shuffled off into different locations through the foster care system. So they would end up spending like years, like kind of going in and out of different homes, never quite like finding that permanent place to call their home. And eventually, Charlotte, the mother, divorces Charles, and she would go on to remarry a new man. And it's during this time she actually attempts to regain custody of all 3 of the girls, like pull them back from the foster care system, which I was shocked like someone could petition to do, but I guess anything's possible.
Yeah.
But the problem was that Sherry, one of the girls, had actually already been like formally adopted like years prior to Charlotte trying to do this. So she was only ever able to like regain custody of 2 of her other daughters. So she gets custody. You can imagine the confusion of these poor kids that sort of had this like disjointed, I don't know, like family unit. And essentially they're growing up in like other people's homes, not necessarily with their siblings. And then once again, their biological mother regains custody. So they have to go back, but one of their siblings is not living with the family. So it's just confusing for sure, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's jarring. Can you imagine? That's like, I mean, I don't know how much time they spent apart from each other. First of all, I was going to clarify.
Years.
So they were
years.
all 3 separated.
Yeah. That's what it
different
sounded
homes.
like. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's so painful.
Well, because it's very rare that like a foster family can just take in like 3 kids at once, you know?
Yeah. So I imagine they're all probably fairly young when they get separated. So how weird is it to come back and like kind of reestablish that relationship? I couldn't imagine with the mom that you remember not taking great care of you.
Yeah. Well, I guess when you're that young, you're not really thinking like that. I mean, because that's a very sound thought. It's a very adult thought. But if that's the only home you've ever known, or the foster care system is even worse than what you remember with your biological mother. Right. That's very possible too, especially in the 70s. Yeah. Now, well, speaking of the 70s, they truly were something else because this does happen. Like the mother is fully able to like legally regain custody. But when she does, and she gets those 2 daughters back, she fails to enroll the girls in school. So they like spend years without any sort of like public schooling or like socializing with other kids. Isn't that horrible? That's illegal.
Do you know how old they are?
They're young. They're young girls. I'm trying to think I mean, I think this story kind of chronicles over a period of years. And I think when Mary Day disappears, she is 13. So try to imagine the eldest is like, young. Like the eldest, Mary Day, like when she comes back is probably like 10, 11, I'm guessing.
Okay.
Young girls for sure. But so for a lot of this, they're just kind of, they're living within the confines of their new home with their birth mother and the man that she remarried, who went by William. William is a very important character to this story. And if things could not get any darker in this household, it's actually around this time that Mary Day becomes a preteen and she starts to experience physical and sexual abuse from the stepfather, William. So throughout this time, I should also note that William is in the U.S. military, so he's getting bopped around the country which is partially why they were never enrolled in school, is because he gets stationed somewhere and the whole family just goes with him, kind of thing. So they're never like making friends. They're just kind of jumping from town to town the whole time. And all through this, the abuse is continuing to go down. And I think it actually gets really bad when he's stationed in Hawaii. Somebody finds out about this and someone reports it again to Child Protective Services. Child Protective Services comes back and they remove Mary Day from the home. This is what's confusing to me. And it has to be a symptom of the 70s. Because what it sounded like from the research is that Mary Day gets removed from like the reported abuse, but the younger sister stays. They don't remove both kids. Oh. But how does that make any sort of sense?
The thought was whoever reported this, they probably knew that she was being sexually abused. No?
I would assume so, yeah. So maybe that's what made it feel
what is
dire.
That thought? What is that logic? Let the new one become, the next victim. Oh, God.
Exactly. Yeah, the younger one. Like it was just all of it was horrible. But it's interesting what happens just a few months after this. So Mary Day, she gets removed. She goes back into the system. But it's around this time that her birth father, like the man who was in the household like before all of this went down, Charles, he unexpectedly dies. And what's even more surprising is he has a small inheritance that he leaves to the girls. So before Mary actually gets taken away and gets, put back into the system, her and her sister kind of make a pact together with their inheritance, which is small, but they're like, this is our emergency money. Like if we ever, let's make a plan as siblings, as sisters. If we ever get into like a jam or we have to run out or we have to get away from the home, this is our money to get out, right? So Mary Day goes back into the system, and her mother and stepfather and the younger sister all move from Hawaii and get stationed down in Seaside, California, which is where this all happens. Now, Seaside is this is their new home. It's the new military base. William is going to be stationed there. It is beautiful, right by the water, scenic, just absolutely gorgeous. This could have been a fresh start for the family. And surprisingly, it would only take until Mary Day turns 13 just a few months after she's removed, where Child Protective Services, and I'm sure this is not the rule now, when you turn 13, you could basically make a decision about where you want to live. Do you want to go back and live with your biological family or stay in the system? And she opts to go back to live with the mother and William. It's so telling.
Well, what I'm thinking is she's there for her sister more than anybody.
Oh, that's such a good point. No, that's probably true, actually. That makes a lot of sense. Well...
Oh, poor thing.
Yeah,
that's
so
she... Scary.
I know. So she does decide to go back to Seaside, right? She goes back to live with them. Maybe she thought that she would be there to protect her sister. Maybe she thought it would be a fresh start, a new leaf. It's a new place. Despite that chance at a fresh start, it only took a matter of weeks before the abuse from William would start up again. And reportedly, him and Mary would often physically fight, and their arguments became loud and violent. And I think that's interesting, and I want to talk about that because I think that paints a really clear picture of the kind of girl that Mary Day was. She was never quite shattered by the abuse. She was sustaining a lot, but she was fighting back a lot of it. She was going up against her stepfather at just 13, maybe trying to protect herself, but also trying to protect her sister, safeguard the whole situation.
Yeah. Wow. Very resilient human being.
Absolutely. Which is interesting and equally devastating in the context of what would happen very soon after this. So there is one major fight that her sister recalled, which seemed particularly aggressive in the home. And the reason she called attention to it is because this was one of the last nights with her stepfather before Mary Day would disappear. Now, within just days, if not the next morning after this fight, Mary Day goes missing from the home. And according to her sister, one of the most sinister tells that something was very wrong here is that her parents do not file a missing persons report, despite her being only 13. I know, you're hearing that and you're going ding, ding, ding. Sadly, because Child Protective Services did not do follow-ups. And they were in a new town where most people didn't even know that they had children, because don't forget, they were never enrolled in any school. nobody even knows this girl is missing. Like, nobody would know she's missing. No one clocks it. And her sister remembered kind of asking her parents, what happened to Mary? Like, this is, like, even being, like, really young, she knew something was wrong. And she's like, Mary's gone. Why is nobody talking about this? And her parents just kept repeating, Mary ran away from home. But she knew that even if that was the case, it was strange that her parents would neglect to file a missing persons report. Like, that even as, like, a kid at, like, 7 or 8.
Yeah, or just, even if it's not about the report, like, the demeanor of your parents would 100%, if they're good parents and they're not, implicated in some way, they'd be freaking out. They'd be like, what happened? Where is she? Crying, emotionally heightened. Like, clearly the younger sister knows that something is not right.
Well, here's where things get even darker. So what's even stranger than that is that her parents attempt to erase Mary Day from their lives. They scrub any trace of her from the house as if she never existed. They rip up all the photos of her. They throw them away. They throw away all her clothes. And if Kathy brings it up, like the little sister, she gets reprimanded. And one of the strangest requests that they made for Kathy, they said under no circumstances is she now allowed to play in a certain corner of the yard. And they did not tell her why.
Stop.
Yeah. So at this point, I think Kathy is actually, I know. I heard that and I'm like, oh
My
boy.
stomach just dropped. No.
I know. I'm
No.
like, oh, if we got a case here. Kathy is like, she's 11, I think, at this time. Yeah, she's 11 years old, which is still pretty young, I think, especially in the 70s. I think 11-year-olds today are very different from a few decades ago. But it's a lot to process, like what's happening around you in the addition to your sister, the only confidant you have in your home, now being gone. But she knows something like in her gut is very wrong with this. Like something's wrong with her parents and something happened to Mary. Now, it's just not very clear like how much time passes after this happens. But I think it's a bit of time that elapses when we know that Mary has disappeared. And then the youngest sister, the one who had been adopted already, Sherry, she starts to make visits because she's getting older. And she like comes to visit the birth mother now that like everything's set up and we're in Seaside, California. Come visit. So she comes to visit, and you can imagine how taken aback she is when everyone's like, Mary's gone. Like, Mary ran away. She's like startled by this information and just like shocked that no one ever brought it up. No one ever mentioned it. And no one's really questioning it. So she just keeps getting the same response, right? Like, Mary ran away. Like, there's nothing else to say about it. And it doesn't sit right with her, again, even as a kid. She can sense there's like a feeling of tension in the house that maybe like at this point, the sister Kathy is afraid to ask questions. Like she's probably been abused if she asks about it. So she waits until nightfall of that first day of like visiting and finding this all out, where she's like alone with Kathy, like in the same room. And she kind of like works up the nerve to like be like, Kathy, what happened to Mary? Like, where is Mary? And even in like the confines of the room, Kathy is terrified to say anything. Like, you can tell there's some severe abuse that was going on.
Yeah.
And she just says, we don't talk about Mary. And she said, I was told to never talk about Mary again. This is so sinister. I'm sorry.
This is like a series. Like, I can see this being a whole, I'm envisioning these people and the setting, and it
really should be.
I'm definitely enthralled. Like you said earlier, like I am enthralled by this. This is so interesting.
I mean, this is just the beginning. I mean, all of the twists and turns this is going to take, you're going to be like, this needs to be like a 10-season series.
Yeah, yeah.
But that is kind of like where things stand with it. They're just like, we don't talk about Mary. So years would pass from this like bizarre familial understanding that the girls are forbidden to ever talk about Mary. And as each year goes by, the youngest sister, Sherry, she just feels like more and more like uneasy about the whole thing. She's like, something's like deeply wrong with her parents, and like something really bad happened. She can't shake that feeling even as she's like maturing into a teenager and then an adult. She specifically recalls being a teenager and overhearing her mother speaking from another part of the house, talking to William. And she said in a quote, there are a lot of places to hide a body in California.
No.
Dark. Sus.
Can I also just say this is so dark because it's one thing if it's like your mother and stepfather that you've grown up with your whole life and you feel very close to them. It's even eerier because she just doesn't know them very well. She's got this weird time in her life where she doesn't know them. So it's like
they're strangers.
Yeah, it's like strangers, and also you're like wrestling with the idea that like you're supposed to be like loyal. Like this is your mom and her chosen husband. Like that's my family.
I know.
But even in her gut, she knows that it's not right. And she's, as a young woman, trying to like reconcile the two feelings.
Totally.
This is so interesting. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, the dichotomy of thought of like having to try to like suppress and like keep kosher with what the rules of the house are. Like, we don't speak of Mary, but at the same time, like you're saying, like, you're never going to shake that feeling, which is exactly what happens here. Like, as the girls start to get older and they eventually become adults, they like try their best to live normal lives because they've experienced a good amount of trauma, and they try to move on and just continue. But something continues to plague them, which is this unanswered question of whatever happened to their sister and why did their parents never report it? So then we're going to jump 20 years would elapse from when she disappeared, right? And one of the sisters goes to the seaside police and she decides, I am going to formally file a police report that my sister went missing in 1981, which surprisingly, even though 2 decades had passed, police take it extremely seriously. So here we go. County Police Redemption Hour. Seaside Police, they really show up for this one. I got to hand it to them. One of the rare instances where they're going to pull through. So police,
all right, county.
I know, they immediately launch their investigation 20 years after the fact, and they start doing some digging to see, maybe we can drum up some paper trails or like trace what might have happened to Mary Day. Because don't forget, the story they have is she ran away when she was 13 back in like the 70s, or sorry, 1981. Now, one of the first red flags that they catch is that her social security number has never been used since the year she disappeared. They were unable to locate any paper trails that could prove like tax was collected under her name, any job history under that social security number, address data, like voter registrations. Like, it's as if Mary Day never existed after 1981. That is
so eerie. Red
flag number one. It's like it's like a dead end. So like the search runs in tandem, like with like a host of records that they're able to obtain from like Child Protective Services, as well as testimony from Sherry, which paints this very clear picture for them that Mary experienced a very dark and troubling childhood, specifically with William. So they're thinking the obvious. They're like, Mary Day never ran away in the 80s, but her parents maybe did something to her. Now, before they're going to run to the hills with this theory and get their warrants and, track down Kathy and everybody and, talk to her about things, they wanted to like learn more about the house. So surprisingly, despite living her life, entirely pressed under the thumb and the fear of the stepfather, they do get a hold of Kathy, and she's very cooperative. And she actually, because don't forget, she was the last person who really saw Mary before she disappeared. Mm-hmm. And she actually shows up with the investigators, leads them back to the childhood home. And they ask her, they're like, can you recount like what the last day was like? Like, what do you remember about Mary before she disappeared in that night? And this was her final memory, which I swear to God, like reading this, she had so clearly suppressed this and like kept it like inside for 20 years. She was told not to talk about this. So finally, when she's in the safety of like someone asking her, like a police officer, an investigator, she just tells everything. Now, on the evening that Mary disappeared, she remembered that her mother and stepfather had actually gone out to dinner that night. And apparently while they were gone, Mary and Kathy were left home alone with William's dog. Somehow the dog got into something in the kitchen and got like extremely sick, like near death. So by the time William came home and found the dog on the kitchen floor, essentially dying, he adored this dog. And you can imagine with the context of like the type of hothead that William is and that abusive personality, he blamed Mary. So according to Kathy, William came to the door, saw the dog, and became completely enraged, like full on going straight for Mary because she was the eldest, she was in charge, and he accused her of intentionally trying to poison his dog. So he throws her into the corner of the room and he just starts pulverizing this poor girl, this child, Now, there are bits and pieces of this that Kathy doesn't remember because she was only 11 at the time, and I can imagine that this was extremely traumatizing. So I would not be surprised if she had blocked some of it out. But she remembers some of the last images of this night that her mother, Charlotte, was standing there watching this happen, and she was afraid to intervene because I don't think it's, I don't know, over the hill to say that she was probably being abused by William as well.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure.
Like so she's terrified to intervene. Kathy is standing there paralyzed, watching her sister just get knocked across the face. And she just remembers seeing blood like running out of Mary's mouth. And the rest was kind of a blur. And she said the next day, Mary was gone. That was all I remember. That's horrific. Horrific.
So I'm doing that thing where you tear.
Oh no. Oh no.
That is, oh my God. Just like such a
I can hear you
injustice.
sniffling. My God.
I'm like, it's such an injustice. It's so sad to think about. Oh my God. Wow.
Well, so you can imagine the officer who's hearing her recount the story, like how harrowing that is. And the detective, he's like, and then when she goes on to explain the corner of the backyard, that is more than enough like circumstantial evidence for him where he's like, I need to make a few phone calls. He wastes no time, and he actually returns, I think later that day, with a team of detectives and forensic professionals and cadaver dogs with a warrant to search that property. And then almost no time at all, no time it takes for those dogs to pick up the trace of a scent in the corner of that yard that Kathy told him she was never allowed to play in. Now, it would seem like a closed case at this moment, but things are about to take a twist like you cannot imagine. Any thoughts before I'm going to jump into the next sequence? Let me take a sip of my Dunkin'. Hold on.
Okay. Remind me, are we at William's house now, or are we like
They've moved. So the William and Charlotte, they no longer live there. They're out in like Kansas or something. Because this is 20 years later, but this is the childhood home that like someone else occupies now, and they don't know anything about this story. So people just showed up and like they're like, we've got warrants. There could be a body in your yard.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I think I misspoke. When they got back with their mom and this William guy, were they moving into William's house?
So let me think. Mary and Kathy were with William and Charlotte when they were living in Hawaii. Then Child Protective Services stepped in because they heard about the abuse, pulled Mary out, and that was when the whole family left Hawaii.
That's right.
And moved to Seaside.
Okay.
Yeah, so then Mary comes back to Seaside.
Because my first thought was like, has he done this before, and has he hurt someone else and they're buried in the backyard?
I can't wait to get into the rest of this. Oh my God. You're already tiptoeing down a track, Miss Stu.
Oh God.
So again, the county detective and his team, as well as the forensic team, they arrive at the property and they begin their trace towards the scent of the corner of the yard. I mean, like, we're all these years, like, after the disappearance. It's 2003 when this is happening, and they're at the childhood home, possibly uncovering a 2-decade-old murder of 13-year-old Mary Day. Now, unsurprisingly, in this forbidden corner of the yard, right under the tree, those cadaver dogs do pick up the scent of what they signal to be human remains. So an excavation begins. But after digging as deep as they could into the yard, they surprisingly do not find Mary Day at all. What they find is the rotten remnants of a little girl's tennis shoe. Now, this leads them to a new and sinister conclusion that they believe Mary Day was murdered by her parents, buried in the yard, and then later exhumed, and the body was moved to a different location. I know. This is insane. Now, according to the detective, the logical assumption with most people who bury bodies, I guess, in their own yards, is that they would later exhume them and take the bodies with them if they're going to move. Because the area of land that you have the most control over in terms of surveillance, in terms of burying, digging, is obviously your own yard. So it makes sense if you're a murderer and you're, I don't know, hiding the evidence on your own property that you've got to take that with you wherever you go. So the theory at this point is that it's just not a strange thought to think that the family moved, but before they did, they just dug up the remains of Mary Day, packed them up, which is a dark thought, and took them with them to the new home. So the police get to work tracking down Charlotte and William to figure out, are they still alive? Because the girls are like super estranged from them. Like they don't communicate with those people anymore.
Thank goodness.
And not only does it turn out that even in 2003, they are certainly still both alive, but like I said, they are living all the way out in Kansas. Charlotte, the mother, is contacted and agrees to sit down with the detective for a one-on-one interview. This is where things are going to get really interesting. And you can look these interviews up. They exist as recorded videos, which is nuts. So when questioned about potentially being involved in the murder of her daughter, she absolutely rejects like any suggestion of homicide. She sticks to her story. She's like, Mary ran away. She ran away in 1981. And she actually goes on to color the story even more and like calls her daughter a night crawler, saying that like she was constantly running away. Like we just like lost track of the number of times that Mary had tried to run away and she just escaped, And like I said, you can watch this footage and it's really, really interesting to see her body language as she's being questioned about all of this. And then this detective eventually goes on to ask her, well, if she ran away and didn't come back, why did you never report her as missing? So eerily, Charlotte in the video kind of seems to like disassociate from the conversation when this is asked. Like she doesn't really give an answer. She starts like talking around it. And then she's like talking about things in the room. And she talks about like her life. And she goes, life is full of regrets. And I wish there were things I could go back and do differently. Like some sort of like BS, right? Response. And this detective sees right through it. I'm trying so hard not to swear. He sees right through it. Like he's not going to waste any time with her so he gets like a bit firm. And then she changes her tune once he gets really firm. And she actually starts to make claims saying that they did file a report. They just filed it in another town. That William actually filed it himself. That's her story. It takes virtually no time at all for this detective to just go do any general search of a public record in California and find that this is completely debunked. There was no missing persons report that has ever been filed at any police station in California for Mary Day since 1981 and beyond. So then Charlotte gets defensive and she starts making claims about her daughter, Kathy, saying that she's trying to brainwash the family and paint this horrible picture for everybody about what happened to Mary and how they were as parents. And it's like, well, yeah, broad. Yeah. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, this part got me so pissed.
Oh my gosh. No, I just had the exact same thought. Like, I am getting angry listening because I'm like, right? I'm trying to, as a human, have empathy for the fact that I think this woman was probably severely abused and so was just trying to make the most out of whatever life she had at the time. And like, but at the same time, like her saying, he went and filed it in another place. Yeah, because that makes a lot of sense. Like, she clearly has a conscience here. Like, she knows that there's regrets. And, I mean, she said that herself. But there's regrets and there's what feels like remorse and guilt.
I would agree to that, I think. But it's just interesting that she's defensive about Kathy and, like, the other daughters, like, trying to tell this narrative. And it's like, because the narrative is that your kids were severely abused and you petitioned to bring them back to that home.
Exactly. And it's very like selfish. And it's also just like, I lost my train of thought. What was I going to say?
You're overcome. You're overwhelmed. There's a lot here.
I'm overwhelmed. No, I guess what I was going to say is that like, fully lost my train of thought.
I felt the confidence in like your setup though. You go, I guess what I was trying to say.
Do you know what? I had a really good thought, but I think I'm so overcome with my anger towards this person, and I'm just like, oh, you know what it is? It's that I feel like she's feigning, like she's like playing the part of a caring mother. Like she's thinking that like this is, I'm gonna pretend like I really cared, and yet like it's very clear that you didn't. And why are we? As the detective, I'm thinking to myself, why are we dancing around this? Like you watch.
He doesn't. He goes straight for the jugular. He's like, what you're feeding me is a load of like crap. He's like, and I'm not gonna waste time with you. He's like, we have a murder case that we're looking at, so Yeah, he's just as he shares the frustration, believe you me, from everyone talking about the reporting here, because she's just dancing around like the room, and she's like, eventually, the detective asks her like, well, okay, what exactly do you think happened to Mary? If this is your story, like, which this woman, and this is on video, don't forget, she sits back in her chair, she kind of takes a pause, she takes a breath, and she says, and this is a direct quote, she goes, well, if she's dead, she's dead. That's how the interview ends. So that concludes,
and
right?
That's recorded.
Oh, yes, it is. Absolutely, it is. Oh my God. So this concludes, right? And the footage is actually analyzed by body language experts who believe that Charlotte was exhibiting like telltale signs that she was lying and withholding information and felt incredibly uncomfortable and nervous about being questioned. So they then are able to track down William, and they bring his ass in for an interview. And he has a completely countered interpretation of what he thinks went down that night, which is very interesting. Now, at first, William makes this claim because he doesn't know how much they know already. Like, he doesn't know what Kathy's told them. He just thinks he's being questioned, like, generally. And he says that the night she disappeared, by the time him and Charlotte came home from dinner, Mary was already gone. He said, we looked everywhere for her in the house, and like we searched the neighborhood. We filed a report with a police station that night. I know. I wish I was on camera because you could see my chest getting red reading this. So the second that they like bring up the detail about the dog, they're like, well, what about your dog almost dying, huh? Suddenly everything clicks for him, and he's like, oh, they know some intimate details. Okay. Mm-hmm. They've been talking to Kathy. So his story completely changes, and he's like, oh, actually, I do remember about the dog. He's like, I came home, and Mary was there. She was always a lot of trouble, that girl. Like he just starts immediately being like, she's a troubled kid. Like she was always trying to get out of the house, and he admits actually to getting like physical with her, abusive. And he even admits to hitting her that night, which is wild. And now this is when things start to go like absolutely off the rails. He starts to spiral. And he starts to make claims that he doesn't remember very much about that night, but he feels as though he was overcome or possessed. His words, possessed. He starts making claims that he felt the devil was inside him that night. So suddenly the detectives are like stepping back, and they're like, okay, we're operating with a different person than what we thought here. Like somebody who's not like really operating in reality. So they kind of change their tune. It's not like bad cop, and they start like gently kind of talking to him now, and they're like, okay, well, are you friends with the devil? Like, do you ever speak to the devil, or do you hear voices? Do you think the devil could have killed Mary? Specifically, do you think the devil could have killed Mary? To which William sits back, and his response is, well, it's possible. Ding, ding, ding. I'm going to put that on merch too. A ding, ding, ding.
A ding, ding, ding. I think we have a devil on our hands. Okay, now, this is so strange because it's like, is he confessing or is he...
Okay, that's what was blowing my mind about this, because it would seem extremely compelling for detectives. But by law, surprisingly, this is not considered comparable to a confession. So the detectives, they actually have no choice but to let William and Charlotte go. And they would spend the next several months they're building their case. They're like compiling all of this information, building the case against Mary's stepfather. Because again, at this point, they don't even have a body. So there's no real evidence like to back up any of this except for the stories from the girls and the report. But just several months after that interview, a discovery is made when an officer contacts this detective and says they have a story that they're going to want to hear. And that would turn this case upside down. Thoughts before I'm going to jump in?
This is crazy. What I'm thinking about is I keep forgetting that we're 20 some odd years down the line.
2003, yeah.
Like, that is wild. How did they not think that this was going to eventually catch up to them somehow, but also, like, that they willingly, like, went in for questioning and stuff, and there really wasn't any evidence yet. It was just, like, storytelling from Kathy. I mean,
it's all like circumstantial.
Dang.
Like, we really have to believe Kathy's word, which of course I think everyone does. I'm sure it's credible, but It's interesting, yeah, like how much time has elapsed, but what happens next, I think, is going to actually send you on a spiral. You're going to spiral
I
out.
am already like so like just this case is really like I'm very, very just enveloped in it.
Captivating,
Okay.
right?
It is captivating. Question. Obviously Charlotte and William are no longer together. They got divorced.
No, actually, I don't know about that. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that, no, they're brought in together. I think they live together in Kansas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that'll add to like that adds layers if they were together or if they're not together.
I'm not 100%, I'll be honest, because I never looked that up. Because there's more meat to this case that like actually goes beyond them, if you can believe it or not.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I'm excited.
Now, let's get back to this story that the officer was like, you're going to want to hear this. They come with this story saying that they had like pulled over a pickup truck, which they realized had stolen plates, and it's like way out in Arizona. This happened like just timing wise, like in the middle of this investigation 20 years later. And when they pulled this truck over and they asked for IDs of the people in the car, they realized that the name of one of the two people who happened to be in that car was a match for the open case of Mary Louise Day. There's a Mary Louise Day in that car. So they get a photo of this woman, which is collected and then compared to like the last available photograph of Mary Day before she went missing. So it's like her at 13. Shockingly, the photos are very, very close. So you could like when this detective who is like on the Mary Day case gets word of this, he is falling to the ground. Like it's impossible. Like he just spent 8 months of his life investigating what everyone was absolutely sure was the murder of this 13-year-old girl. And now there are apparently claims that there's a woman who's pulled over in Phoenix who looks just like her and has the same name. It seems like so convenient timing-wise that he's like, absolutely not. I have to get on a plane. He goes to Phoenix immediately to further investigate and question this woman. Now this detective sits down with the woman who at this point is now claiming she is the Mary Day. She's like, I am the missing girl. And he's suspicious. He begins to question her, and he's like asking her about stories from her childhood. And immediately he's finding holes in her story. One in particular is that this woman does not seem to remember the sick dog, which was the whole reason for the final fight in which the stepfather like beat her. And apparently she ran away, you know?
Yeah.
So when he calls attention to that, this woman just sort of starts like flailing with her story. And she claims that, you know, she was beaten so bad that her memory of that night is like really fuzzy. And there are some things that she might have forgotten. And what seems to make this whole interaction even more suspicious is that outside of this woman not remembering the story is that once they deep dive into the idea that once they deep dive into the ID, again, have not read through this research. Once they deep dive into the ID that Mary Day was issued, they realize that it was issued weeks before this woman was pulled over. That's sus.
Oh, no. Okay.
Now, all of this is unconvincing enough that the detective is able to order a DNA test of the woman, to which the results nearly break the man. The DNA test would confirm that this woman was in fact the daughter of Charlotte Day, making it almost 100% certain that this was in fact Mary Day. He's like, how is that possible? Any immediate thoughts on that?
I have full body chills. Wait, I have some weird like gut feeling right now, but I like don't want to stop you.
Okay, I'll keep going. Well, when word gets back to Sherry and Kathy about this, they are in complete disbelief because they had lived the majority of their lives kind of secretly thinking that their sister was probably murdered. And then they'd it's just like strange to think that, I'm trying to remember who was there. Kathy and I guess Sherry were both there, just thinking that the whole time as they grew up, their sister was buried in the backyard, is what they thought. Year after year, they would look to the backyard, just envisioning that their sister's body was there. So to get word that there is a DNA match with this woman rocked their world. Like they were beside themselves. In their minds, it feels as if their sister was resurrected from the dead. You know? They can't wrap their head around it. But at the same time, you can't refuse or like refute a DNA test. Like it's on paper, it's black and white that this is their sister, right? Still in complete disbelief, but also with the optimism of like finally getting to reconnect with their sister who they thought they lost, they invite her to come live with them in California. And Mary Day would go to live with her sister Sherry. But the more time that they spend around her, something feels like kind of off, right? She's very different from how they remember her. And there are certain details about her childhood that she can't seem to recall. A bit specifically, and there are some facets to her that are really, really different now and interesting. She speaks with a southern drawl now, which according to experts probably would have taken her. I know. Give me a sec.
I'm like, she's been listening to CreepTime.
Well, the experts who listened, they were like, it would have taken her living in somewhere in the South for more than a decade for her to naturally develop that, which I'll debunk just from anecdotal evidence because it took me 30 seconds and I'm currently living in it. But according to this woman's story, she'd only lived in the South for about 2 years after she ran away. But also, what also like feels unnerving for Kathy is that Mary doesn't seem to remember the inheritance. If you remember that story, like when the birth father died and he left them that like inheritance and they made that pact together and they were like, this is our secret money. This is our escape plan because they had codenamed it Mohawk. That was the code name. She has no memory of that. She goes, I don't know what you're talking about. So that's like really sitting strange with them. They're like, what? Something about all of this doesn't feel right. But again, on paper, the DNA test says that she is their sister. So there's no room for an argument here. Now, Sherry and Kathy sort of separately and silently develop their own suspicions on Mary, but eventually, once Sherry notices that Mary is receiving mail at the house, she realizes that it's addressed to a completely different name, Monica Devereaux. And that's where the sisters start to develop this conspiracy and begin to question, is this our sister? How would that even be possible? True. I didn't even think about that. Monica Devereaux. Now, while that sort of like internal familial conspiracy is going down, the Mary Day case, it still seems to be like accruing evidence as the years go by because it didn't fully close. Like it had been like a really like hot and heavy 8-month investigation. But once this woman shows up, they're like, well, damn, I guess there's really no case here. But it doesn't close. Like they still kind of keeping a tab on it because they're not certain either. Investigators, that is. And we roll around to 2008. Police are investigating an unrelated case at an army base known as Fort Ord. And while having cadaver dogs on the scene, one of the dogs picks up the scent in the yard that would suggest that human remains were once buried there. While searching the archived records of the former owners of that home, there is one name that stands out amongst the lot. William Hoole had previously occupied that home. So you can imagine the confusion that this would have for what was supposed to be a closed case on a missing person who now we've got 2 separate properties that William Hoole has previously occupied, both of which are having hits from cadaver dogs that are picking up traces of human remains. But we supposedly have Mary Day alive and well, living with her sister Sherry in California. What's going on with that? The case seems to have so many points of contradiction. And the investigators were so weary that they had gotten something wrong in this that they actually would end up tapping a detective to come out of retirement to aid in the Mary Day investigation. They're like, there is a stone here that has not been unturned. He would rely mostly on circumstantial evidence to help build a new conspiracy to explain what he thinks really happened with Mary Day. So he concocted this conspiracy that the DNA test was correct. That woman was Charlotte Day's daughter. But he believes that she's not Mary Day. He thinks she may have been possibly another daughter, a slightly older daughter of Charlotte's that she had before Mary. And then when police came knocking for William and Charlotte in Kansas after those interviews, because don't forget, this was just a few weeks that this woman appeared out of the blue after those interviews, they got scared. And in an attempt to cover up a 2-decade-old murder of their daughter, they provided Charlotte's estranged daughter with Mary Day's birth certificate, Social Security card, and as a trade-off for her to pose and live under a new, clean identity and record, she would go along with it. Now, you can't build a full conspiracy and case on just a hunch, right? But there are some things here that make, complete sense. For one, the motive is there, I think, for both the parents to cover their ass, but also the possibility that this estranged daughter who might have had trouble with the law, might have had a bad record, she can get a fresh start. She can start anew. She can get a job anywhere. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Something about that. I don't know. They need tangible evidence, though, is the problem. So, like, they're like, for this to hold up in court, like, yeah, we've got a story, but we need some scrap of, like, real evidence here. So that investigator that they had pulled out of retirement, he's able to tap a forensic anthropologist to return to the original childhood home that Mary Day allegedly disappeared from, and they take soil samples from the corner of the yard, for which the pathologist is able to confirm the presence of very, very old human remains that were once in that soil. So now it's not just as simple as a dog sniffing. Like, we've got some concrete evidence that a body was there in that corner of that yard at some point. But now that they have the confirmation of the remains and they present that to Kathy and Sherry privately, they also show them the shoe, that like tattered shoe, if you remember, that they had recovered.
Yeah.
Kathy believes it looks identical to shoes that Mary used to wear when she was younger. In an extremely unforeseen twist, they now once again believe that their sister Mary Day is in fact dead and that they are living with an imposter. Come on.
Do you know, though, that that's exactly what I was thinking? I was like, if they have that dang shoe still, if there's any chance that they could find any DNA on that shoe and run it against this imposter and prove that they're not the same person, oh my God.
Well, I mean, they really thought this was concrete. Like, they built an entire case to prove out what they believed to be, like, the final story. This is the final chapter to suggest that Mary Day was murdered. But there's one problem here. They're wrong.
No.
There's more to the story. So now we're going to roll around to 2017. So this is about a full decade after, like, this retired detective, Mark Clark, had drummed up the theory that he felt he could prove that Mary Day was in fact murdered all those years ago and that this woman was a fraud. His words, not mine, but I just wanted to say fraud. Now, at this point, the case actually gets turned over to the new chief of police in Seaside, our forensic county, and she picks up the case and revisits all of the information from scratch, in addition to the conspiracy that was drummed up and presented by Mark Clark. And she takes a counter approach, and she actually believes that this is a case of Occam's razor. All signs point to the obvious. In her mind, you know, the DNA test was more than likely correct. That William and Charlotte probably did tell the truth. Maybe Mary Day did just run away when she was 13, and that this woman claiming to be her is in fact her. But immediately this is hit with, like, you know, all of the evidence of the case that was, like, picked up over the years. And now we've got the cadaver dogs that seem to pick up the possible trace of human remains at two separate properties that William Hoole was once at. The presence of the former human remains, possible decomp found in the soil of the childhood home, and of course the shoe, which was found and presented to Kathy, and she's like, it's identical to what Mary would wear. Now, the police chief, her problem with the shoe specifically, she's like, sorry, this is not a comparable size to, like, Mary's age. It's a shoe that's, like, fit for, like, a 5 or 6 year old girl, not for a 13-year-old. And it, like, just would not make sense that she would have been wearing that shoe at the time that she was suspected of being murdered. And there ends up being so much conflict and back and forth on the evidence in this case that it's actually never officially shut, despite there being, like, this literal person who claims and is living her life as Mary Day. Now, the original detective on the case decides to track down Mary Day for one final interview because he thinks he's going to get the seal on the story. He's like, gonna ask her, is it you? Are you her, or are you this other daughter, this unknown daughter that we've never clocked? And at this point, it's actually it's a good time to do it because, surprisingly, this woman claiming to be Mary Day had already moved out of Sherry's house, and she's actually living out in Missouri, and she's battling late-stage cancer in her late 40s. She's on her deathbed, this woman. So if there's any time where they're going to get the final answer to this story, it's now. So this final interview would prove to be the defining feature of the mystery of Mary Day, as this woman really kind of opens up about her life and about her experiences after she apparently ran away in 1981. And she claims that, once she ran away when she was 13, she lived on the streets for like a good number of years. And by all accounts, her life was like really rough. And the reason that she went by the name Monica Devereaux, because they bring that up and throw it at her, is because when she ran away, she said that she was terrified of being tracked down as Mary Day and being brought back to that situation, because technically that had happened before, So she lived under a different name for decades, is the story. She eventually had to get a state ID under her legal name in order to get state benefits, because she was diagnosed with she had her gallbladder removed just shortly before she was diagnosed with cancer. So in order to get that done, she had to get state benefits and have an ID present. There was no way around it, and she could not do that while living under an alias. She expressed a great sense of remorse and pain in this feeling that she had kind of rejected her identity for so much of her life. And then suddenly, all of these decades later, she's reunited with her family, and then kind of brought to the heels of this constant conspiracy and rejection and suspicion by people who she thought she loved, saying that she's still a missing person. She's not who she says she was, and she just still wanted people to believe her. 9 days after that interview, she lost her battle with cancer in Missouri. And even at the time of her death, the two sisters still denied that this woman was in fact Mary Day. So no one attends her funeral. She's buried alone. The police chief from Seaside doesn't feel like the story's done here. Like, she still doesn't feel like any of that is concrete and we need to put a button on the story. So she becomes determined to finish the ending to Mary's story and find one final piece of evidence that could put the nail in the coffin here. She's able to track down a woman from one of Mary Day's like stories in her final interview from like a couple of years after she ran away and said she was living on the street. The woman's name is Mari, and she had taken Mary in at 15, according to Mary Day's story. And this woman had raised her along her daughters until one day she woke up and Mary had just run away. So the woman is tracked down, and she's actually able to provide a picture of Mary at the alleged age of 15, which is analyzed by a facial recognition expert who is able to compare 3 separate photos, one from when she was 13, Mary Day as an adult, and then this picture at 15. This person concludes there is a 99% chance that these are all a match. She said she was who she said she was. That woman was Mary Day. And although it's too late at this time, at the time that it was determined, and she never really gets to see it, after 36 years of the Mary Day case, it is officially closed, and both of her sisters now know that she was never murdered. The most bizarre case I had come across in a while. I mean, it is just a puzzle of circumstantial evidence that would seem to align, but none of it was real. And it's interesting because I think that this is a really compelling case for when investigators want to force fit stories that aren't there. Mm-hmm. There was a lot on the table that seemed compelling, like the 2 separate residents where the cadaver dogs were picking up traces of human remains. Like, so much of this aligned where you're like,
but
yes.
What were those human remains?
Unknown. It could have been very, very, very old. I mean, maybe it was a property that like way back in the day someone was buried on. I'm talking like hundreds of years ago. I don't know why that would make sense in Seaside, California, but it's possible. Just so much of this fell into place.
When I said earlier, I was like, when I was like, ooh, I have a gut feeling, but I don't want to say anything. Mm-hmm. So my gut was that this William character is bad news. And I was going to a place where like, has he killed other people or has he gotten with the wrong crowd? And he like takes care of people that have been killed and like buries them, because like, why would the parents say, don't go in that corner of the yard?
True. I mean, there's no other, he might have died at this point, actually. I'm not sure how old he was, but there's no further investigation, I think, after 2017 when Mary Day passes to try to convict William, because it seems like everything they had built up was around her alleged murder, which just didn't exist, they found. Yeah. So if that is true, that he was burying people, and maybe that's part of the reason why they never reported her missing, was that he was involved in some shady stuff, so he didn't want police like snooping around if there was a missing kid, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think he must have been.
He had to
because
be.
if they found that at both properties, that just seems like, talk about Occam's razor. Like, this guy is involved in. You don't move to two different houses where they both have some sort of human remains getting sniffed out. I mean,
I know.
Wow. That was
Isn't
fabulous.
that wild? I mean, that is the final
was-
story that will ever be told of Mary Day, because finally, even in death, she has the validation that she is no longer a missing person. That was her, and she was just dealt a horrific hand by people who were abusive.
Gosh, I just wish before she died we could have gotten, well, I guess, I mean, you did go into a lot of it, but more of a scope of like what her life had been like for the past 20 years. Like,
Yeah.
how had she made ends meet? How did she like grapple with knowing that she like left a family behind and had two sisters that she left behind? Like, I'm sad that she died, because what a fascinating story of like, kind of like we said at the very beginning, resilience, like a very resilient person.
Absolutely.
And also just a tale of abuse and what aftermath happens. Like,
I know.
wow.
And what's kind of
That was
devastating
so
about
compelling.
it. I know. Well, her sisters, I think it's particularly devastating because, like I said, she was buried alone, because even at the time of her death, her sisters were convinced. They were like, that's not Mary. That's someone else pretending to be her. So it is sad that this all came out after the fact, and they now know the truth, that was Mary all along. And I'm sure they live with that to an extent, but I think they were right to be suspicious, because so much of their lives had been wrapped up in conspiracy and lies and mistruths. But I really do have to hand it to the Seaside County Police Chief for just really tracking all of this down and like finally putting the whole story to bed.
I mean, dang, is this like county's first victory?
Really?
Lap
I'm
for
going to
us?
name this episode County's First Victory. Yeah, surprising, right?
Okay, county, we see you.
Well, if you remember the last episode with Jack and I talked about when the police came in to investigate the poltergeist, and they said, not our job, and they walked out.
Yeah. I know. I started dying laughing when I was listening.
Because it's like par for the course that any decade, any time they come in, they're like, not a police situation. We'll go. I mean, truth be told, it's not, but I don't know. Do something.
Y'all can handle this. If we can't see it, we're not touching it.
Yeah. But yes, dude, that is the wild ass story of Mary Day. Not even like not a true crime case, just a strange disappearance that somehow had an end. It has a solve.
And it's really interesting being in the seat that I'm in, because I feel like our rhythm is that I normally am just like trying to be a sleuth and figure out like what's going on. And it really is such a exercise of like, sometimes you can't trust your gut. Like sometimes you have to, things are not as they seem. There's, people that are really capable of doing awful things, and they have the track record that you think like obviously would put them in that position, like this William guy. And he actually, at the end of the day, like he was a horrible human being, abusive, but ended up not committing this crime. It's just like, ooh, it makes you like question your own gut and your own instincts.
I had the same experience. So when I first heard this story, I was going through the same motions as you. I was like, oh, this is an open and shut case. I know what happened here.
Yeah.
I was like, I know every scenario that probably happened here. I did not expect this ending. So yeah, it was kind of like a testament to, I think, what the investigators were probably going through, where they were trying to force fit the puzzle pieces. But it wasn't telling a story of truth. That wasn't what happened.
Wow.
Yeah, even going as far as to deny, like, question DNA tests, I was like, we're reaching, but it's possible, I guess.
Yeah.
Stu, that's all I got for you. That is the harrowing story of Mary Day. I think next week I'm excited because I'm going to pull together another case, but I'll make it juicy. It'll be like an unsolved or a classic true crime or something, but this one was compelling.
Yeah, well, you know what? I was just thinking, I was like, normally when we do Unsolved, I always walk away and I'm going to text you like the next day being like, what if this happened? What if that happened?
I know.
Now you don't have to hear from my ass. It's just going to be me at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling, wondering.
Well, I know it's a weird feeling like when you end it, because you're like anticipating as like a reflex, like doing your sleuth work, but you're like, no, I guess that's the start and the end, isn't it?
It is what it is.
Shoot.
County said it is what it is.
County said Occam's razor, girl. That female police chief, she was like, Occam's razor. Stop trying to tell a narrative here.
Yeah.
She said she's here. Wild. I gotta track down that police chief and be like, congrats to you for putting the story to bed.
Go, girl.
Well, Stu, that is all I got. Creepers, thank you so much for joining us for the ride. This is not a Friday episode. This is a Thursday episode because I'm doing moving stuff tomorrow, so I'm not going to have time. So I appreciate you joining.
It's a full moon. Are you looking at the moon right now? Oh, well, I guess it's very dark where I am. Not dark yet.
It's not moon, dark, baby. But I thought it was a full moon last night. Maybe it was like the step just before. How long does the full moon last? 3 days?
I don't know, but I'm looking at what looks like a full moon.
Okay, werewolf stew. Oh my god, that was another case I had on my list. Because I was looking up, like, I wanted to do something paranormal and like phenomenon. Yes. There's like an old insidious case in like a town that is believed to have been like terrorized by a werewolf. Isn't that crazy?
I love that.
I've never heard a story like that, so I was like, I think we need to look. We need to take a gander.
Is it in the United States or it's like old-timey like Europe or something? Okay.
I don't know. Let me see if I can just like pull it up real quick. Werewolf case real. The things I'm searching for this. Real werewolves in history. The Richardson family murders.
Were there any werewolves at Parapod?
No.
Is there like a werewolf
I wanted it
community?
To be
It's just vampires.
They're called furries. They're furries.
Oh, yeah, duh.
Yeah, Jack and I have an inside joke that Jack is a furry, but the more that the joke carries on, the more I'm starting to believe it's real. Did we see any furries at Parapod? I don't think we did. No, I would have loved to because they're a good time. There's a wild documentary about one of the first like furry cons and how harrowing it was. So you can find this on YouTube. Jack knows it. He showed it to me. One of the first like furry cons, like they had a really tough time booking a hotel that like hosted like a conference center. And all of these people showed up, all of these furries, and they were wild, Stu. Like it was heinous what these people did to this hotel. They're now banned from like almost every hotel in the country because of what they did. Like, oh my God. Debauchery, like trashing hotel rooms, like orgies all night. Like it was just like treacherous, like you couldn't imagine.
Okay, he's officially a furry. If he's not only like he has a minimal knowledge of it, but he's doing deep dives.
He's
on
showing
YouTube
me docs, amateur docs. I don't know. I need to investigate. I need Nancy on the case,
yet,
please.
I'm fascinated.
Also, before we go, congratulations to you, Stu, on the Zodiac episode, because that is our most popular episode to date.
Oh my gosh.
I wanted to just like...
Thank you for indulging me in what a harrowing episode. Not only was it first of all, the content's harrowing, 2 hours plus, and all the technical difficulties we had.
I was going to say, it was 2 hours plus with the cuts. I was like, I think the recordings were close to 3.
Yeah, so congrats to you for making it through and also on an empty freaking stomach.
It was amazing. No, that was such a fun episode because I it's so rare I like get to hear a story I've never heard before, so I was so excited. And you did so well too. I don't know if you've seen like any of the comments the creepers left, but they loved it. They thought you did amazing.
Oh, I love creepers. They're so sweet.
I do too. They're so smart
that was so
too.
much fun.
They think
for
of
me.
theories we've never thought of before.
I know. I really am amazed. Like when I do have the time and I can look at some of the comments they have. I mean, they're absolute sleuths. I'm like, how did you think of that? Like, it's crazy.
It's like little mirrors. Plausible. They remind me so much of us. Like I read their comments in our personalities because I think they're very similar.
Absolutely.
So Creepers, thank you so much for listening. This has been a thrilling episode, and although it's Thursday, we're going to catch you next Friday for a new one. Should we say goodbyes, Stu?
Yeah, goodbye, creepers.
Bye, creepers. Have a wonderful Thursday night, and we'll see you next week.